ver si está ya. Hello and welcome everybody. How you doing? My name is Scott. I am the host of this weekly D&D discussion show. This is Optional Rule. I run this weekly D&D discussion show around all things related to theory crafting, game mastering, anything related to running real games in the real world. So if you've ever had trouble with environment, travel, how to make the exploration pillar useful or interesting, I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on that today. I've posted on Twitter a couple of times this week around how I found the current rules dissatisfying, which everybody does. That's not very historic as a statement. I've mentioned that I've been working on, or at least thinking about, some system that if I were going to use it would fall in the middle of something like a Stars Without Numbers, ship-based combat system, an Adventures in Middle-earth, group-based journey system, and mixes the D&D travel rules as they existed. And someone said, well, what do you mean by that? I have no idea what you're even talking about there. So I thought I'd unpack a little bit about that today, offer some advice about how you can make exploration, travel, and environment interesting in your game. And really, I'm hoping to hear from you today, because you probably see a little window right here about some ideas that I'll be talking about. I'd love to fill in some of those thoughts. So I want to use this stream as just a way to think through what do I mean when I say that? What are some of the components? I'll talk to you about why I'm not satisfied with some of the things I've seen so far and why specifically. Not I just don't like them, but what is it not a great fit for, in my opinion, to what we're trying to achieve here? What are some of the barriers in the system to achieving something interesting there? How it used to go in old school D&D and a bunch of other things. But I'm going to talk a little bit about some systems we might be able to put in place, and maybe I can microblog those to help enhance games where you think they're useful. So first of all, this is a small stream. I'm a small streamer. I stream every Saturday at noon Eastern time. I hope you'll join me each week for a new discussion. Mostly I do game prep, but about half the time we've canceled a lot of sessions lately, so I'm doing a little bit more game theory and designing and things like that. So if you're welcome, I know one person, what is it? I'm back on the horse. I don't know what that means. So tell me what that means down in chat. But welcome to the stream. You said your first time here. It's great to have you. I hope you'll participate in the discussion. Yeah, so we're going to get started today and talk a little bit about exploration, travel, and environment. First of all, if you're a player of mine joining me here, there's no spoilers for our game today. I think we put off 2 sessions now for birthdays and a few other things, which are fine. But I'm prepared, so I don't have to do any more prep in the today's stream. And I wanted to talk a little bit about theory. Now, before I get into this, there's a great thing about theory, or unrealized thing about theorizing and designing and all these things you need to add. You hear about the folks on YouTube. We'll talk a lot about dungeon mastering. You'll read blogs about it. I know blogs are not important. I'm a blogger, but or Twitter or whoever, they have all this advice of what you should be doing in your game. So the first thing I want to put up front is you can't do everything. Right? There's lots of advice, but those are something to stash away in your toolbox if you're not sure what to do in the moment, or you're looking to enrich an encounter, or you're looking to bring a focus on something in particular. But you should know that most people just kind of run everybody's game, no matter who they offer in their advice column or their Twitch stream like this one, my game, anybody's game. Most of our games, most of these like high level DM advice YouTubers, I know a few of them, and if you watch their streams, you'll notice most of their games are just kind of regular. We have this impression that when we talk through these rules that everybody else is including all these interesting stuff in their games and they're doing this stuff we wish we can get to and all this stuff. And the truth is, most everybody is just trying to get through a couple hours and have some fun. And their game is just kind of muy regular, right? It's just kind of they're getting to what they can. I myself have all these theory crafting stuff. Sometimes I incorporate it into my game. Sometimes I don't. I'm going to talk a lot about exploration thoughts that I brought a little bit into my game, but haven't been able to bring in too much mostly because of time. For me, like a lot of people, I run a game about 3 hours is what I max out at. We're running online right now because of the pandemic, obviously, but 3 hours, what that actually means is we usually get a half hour. We started a half hour late because people are late or they're getting their mic set up or they're doing whatever. Not my favorite thing, but that's common. So we get about 2.5 hours of actual play, and that's assuming I can fit the end of the session exactly at that hour, the hour we're trying to end, because we do it during the weeknight, so we end a little late for us, and I can't run over. So often I'm ending 15 minutes early, maybe even 20 minutes early, because I can't fit in whatever the next thing is, an encounter or combat that I can't get through in the time left in the game. So I call the game there. So quite often we're running a 3-hour game. We're running an actual game time from 2.5 hours to maybe 2 hours even sometimes, or just a little over. And it's hard to fit a lot of game into that time. That's a really thin margin to fit game in. So all this exploration stuff, or mounted combat, or enriched magic system, or foraging, or herbalism, or crafting, or whatever that you might hear, it's really hard to fit in a lot of these major systems into a 2.5 hour session. So when you see these things, don't take it too hard. Use what you can. Ignore what you can't. Use it in some sessions, but not others. Whatever's useful for you, use it. All right, so let's talk about exploration and things like that. So. And I'd love to hear your comments, by the way, down in the chat. If you're seeing this later, like, follow, subscribe, all the social media stuff. I really would appreciate it. Really would help me out. And really, if you could share this on Twitter, share it on Twitch, tag me on Twitter. Those things would help the channel grow. I've been doing this since September. People have received my content very well. I'm very, very grateful for the reception that I've generally gotten and the connection that I've made online. And I hope to continue to do that. And I hope you'll be part of it. I hope you'll make connections too through my feed, through the thing here, whatever. So give me your thoughts as we talk through this. So first of all, I'd love to hear what you want out of exploration, but two, you may or may not be finding as useful in exploration. So there's a number, if you look on DM's Guild, there's a number of exploration systems that exist out there already. I'm not a big fan of them, and I'll tell you why. Like the top reason is, I'm going to go to my blog here so I can show you some other stuff. The top reason is that there's a inherent flaw in most of the exploration systems I've seen for D&D, and that is they're trying to be simulationist. They're individualized, first of all, and they're trying to be simulationist. So what do I mean by that? Let's start with the simulationist thing. Is when people get into exploration rules, I'm trying to find a blog post I had earlier. That's what I'm typing here. Exploration rules, they tend to do it too old school, and I'm as old school as they come, because I was playing first edition D&D back in the AD&D days, and I remember back then we tracked rations, we tracked how much water you had, if we bothered to do it. A lot of times we didn't, because we were teenagers, right, or young, not even teenagers. I think I was 12 when I started. Or, we tried to, like, so you run into a river, how do you get across the river? And we'd make people describe out tying ropes off, shooting an arrow across with a rope, all this stuff that really just, as a teenager or even a preteen, was a big deal, because the world is a big, scary place. So you're thinking through, what would I do if I got out in the world? But for most of us, we're older, or just we're used to video games, or we're just not as interested in that level of detail. So I think that's simulationist, and just, it's dry. It's in terms of fun. I don't want to track rations. I don't want to. I can figure out my character with a proficiency in survival can figure out how to get across a river. Personally, I can. I'm a Boy Scout, and I was in the Army. I can do all I can think through those things. Many other people can't. So, and even if they could, what's the point of it, right? You do it once, and you kind of know from then what's the utility for a future of a game. So anyway, that's the simulation end of most rules that I think happen. I don't find useful off the DM's Guild. Plus, I'm not going to spend $5 to read and decide if I like a set of rules. So that's a huge barrier for me with DM's Guild. By the way, the stuff I post is free. I run a blog at optionrules.com. I hope you give it a visit. There is a summary of alchemy rules here that includes some foraging rules I'll reference. Where's my other thing? I had something on foraging. I can't find stuff in my own blog. That's how long it's been out there. I've only been doing it since September, but I've got 60-something articles or something. So go ahead and take a look at it. But so the I think it's herbalism. Sorry, herbalism. And if I can't find that, I'll just move on. That's fine. Okay, so what we want out of the exploration pillar is something that's engaging with the players, that they can use their skills to modify the outcome of a situation, and the situation has some stakes to it. I posted it a little bit earlier on Twitch today, Twitter, not Twitch. Stakes. Everything you do in a game should have some sort of stakes, which means there's either a gain or a loss that is managed by the player's action or inaction, right? So the world, if the players take no action at all, will sort of atrophy into a bad place, or if they take action, they have to use their skills in a thoughtful way and get the rolls right to nudge it in a good direction, right? That's one philosophy of world design. I tend to use it that way. So you want adventuring to be a similar thing, exploration and travel to be a similar thing. But what does that mean in a context of worlds where you heal hit points overnight and where getting lost? What does it really mean? All of in this world, what does it mean to interact with the environment in a way that has stakes? Another sort of failing of a lot of these simulation systems is they try to view it in that old school way of like falling down a hill. You take a few hit points of damage, or you get sick or something like that. Damage, getting lost, all those things aren't really stakes in most D&D games. Travel specifically, damage is almost useless in the travel scenario, because when a player sleeps, they heal completely overnight. So any damage, they fall down a hill, take all their hit points, go unconscious. They camp for a night and they wake up the next morning and they're absolutely fine. It's as if nothing happened. So who cares? Really, who cares if a player takes damage when they travel? The other things that could happen to them that people generally think from these supplements, like they get lost. Well, that takes a little extra time of the journey. Again, who cares? What does it really matter? That usually ranges from annoying to completely irrelevant, right? So as a stake, that's kind of dry, right? That's not something you can do something with. And other things like starvation, and you start getting into mini games that, who cares? Do you really want players start feeling like this is just tedious and it's not interesting? So I think these things are the reason why most exploration rules fall flat. I'm not going to solve that today, by the way. I'm going to talk about the components that I think could go into making one up, but it's going to take a lot of work on my part to get to a place where we think we have something interesting in exploration rules. But I'm going to talk about the raw material here. The other thing I said is individual risk. That's where these rules fall short for me. When something happened, they happen to a player. I just don't think that's a great way to run wilderness exploration, because you're needlessly punishing a single player. And really, what's the point of that, right? Like, I like the idea of group-based systems. This is an old theory from the early 2000s. Someone put it as in individual risks and shared rewards. That's a bad design, because it incentivizes the wrong kind of behavior in a game, right? That individuals have to pay the price for actions, whereas everybody who doesn't take an action benefits from it. Like they get the gold, or they get the experience points, or whatever. So that creates this asymmetric kind of play that is not enjoyable. Sometimes asymmetric play is enjoyable, but in these cases it's not, because the player who dared take an action, they either get laughed at by the rest of the party who didn't, or they take damage, or they lose some resource, or they expend something, or something like that. And for the players who didn't do anything, it cost them nothing. They sat there and watched this person do his thing. But if that person succeeds, where they get food, or they get find a new path, or they get treasure, or something like that, it usually gets split up amongst the party. So the whole party benefits if they do nothing. And so it incentivizes doing nothing, not working together. That's not what you want out of this system. So where does the answer lie? I give you 3 examples of things. I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle of the 3 systems that you might be able to see on the page I'm listing here, which is, first of all, I name a specific system, but it could be any sci-fi system. I think there's probably a richer field for ideas for travel, making travel interesting and exploration, if you make it a group-based activity. And where that happens most often in role-playing games is science fiction games. So viewing, most science fiction games have some subset of rules or mini game for ship combat. And in a ship, all the players are assumed to be on the same vessel, right? And they're all working different systems together to get a good outcome, but they're all linked. The outcome is all linked, and the how well they can achieve that outcome is usually linked to the combination of skills that they're using together. I think that has applicability in D&D travel because it does a few things. One, it taps the entire party, so it gives everybody something to do. Two, it shares both the risk and the reward. So if a ship blows up in a sci-fi game, everybody's sort of a problem with that, or they lose some precious gift on the ship. The ship, and in D&D terms, this can be the traveling party, is viewed as a central resource. So things like rations, how exhaustion, how easy a party is to ambush, how easy it is for a party to ambush somebody else, how well they're able to manage the risk of random encounters, find additional treasure. All of that should be an impact that affects the entire party all at once, not just a single character. So I think that systems like Traveler, Stars Without Numbers have some real interesting concepts that we could leverage. Now, I'm actually going to get, and I named Stars Without Numbers because that's a specific system I sort of like. I think we might be able to tap. Now, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that here and what their design is. I'm not going to go into detail because it's a couple pages long, but what they basically do is they look at a ship like, actually, let me give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about today, then we can get back. I'm going to cover Adventures in Middle-earth. Adventures in Middle-earth is actually the only system I've seen that's an implementation of the kind of sci-fi ship-based system that I'm talking about here. So they divide. It's one of the most interesting it's called the Journey system. There's some things that don't exactly fit D&D, but I think there's a lot of potential in the Adventures in Middle-earth Journey. It's an out-of-print system because the publisher lost the rights to Middle-earth Publishing, which is a huge shame. It's a great system. So we'll take a look at the Journey system today. And Stars Without Numbers, what we're looking at is ship-based combat, crew actions. I think they're called crew actions. Let me see. Crew actions are ship crisis. They are called ship combat actions, right? So we're going to look at ship combat actions today. In Adventures in Middle-earth, we're going to look at journeys. And then we're also going to look at the DM's Screen Wilderness Kit, because the ideal system would provide a group-based action that everybody can participate in some way, shape, or form, that the outcomes, the risks, both the risks and reward are shared throughout the entire party, that there's some tangible game reason to be doing what they're doing, and it creates some sets of stakes for the players, right? That's what we're core of what we're trying to do. And in an ideal world, that system would interact well with the existing wilderness survival system that are present in the D&D rules. There's a supplement that came out for D&D not long ago, last year I think it was, end of last year, called the Dungeon Master. It's a Dungeon Master Screen Wilderness Kit. It's pretty good. I think it's worth the money. It's like 20 something bucks. It is not new rules. It is a compilation of rules on just 3 of these sort of laminated cards. It's a compilation of rules that are spread across the DMG and a few of the other adventures for surviving in the wilderness. So, and they're a little bland. They don't really provide you a whole lot, but I think that there's a few nuggets in there that are worth keeping and really, I think, help players manage their life in the wilderness. So I think in a good situation, you would have a set of rules that interacted with the existing rules well and could be compartmentalized. That would be great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about terrain familiarity, things we could do like terrain positioning for ambushes, exhaustion and pushing yourself in the wilderness. Turn this into a header. Environmental effects from, we're probably not going to get to that, but we'll talk about what that is. Conditions and situations, because they're adding conditions for the group. These are group-based conditions. Could be interesting. What happens if you have a crisis out in the wilderness? What kind of events can happen? All of that kind of stuff. This would form sort of a way to interact and manage with these subsystems. So let's take a look at Stars Without Numbers. So the core system here, I'm not going to break the system, the entire system down, but the core system is there's some type of group roles and group actions. So in other words, players can be assigned to the bridge, captain, comms, gunnery, or engineering. You're going to see that concept again in a second in Adventures in Middle-earth, because over there they provide, let me see if I can find it right here. I think it is. Yeah, you can a guide, scout, hunter, lookout. I think there's other potential like cook. I don't know what to call it, but like a logistics person, things like that. That could all go together. Now, in the Stars Without Number case, you can attempt group actions that happen on the ship, and they cost command points, right? And you can build up a number of command points by certain player characters just doing their duty, or build up command points, and they can spend those command points by taking different types of actions. I think that's overkill, but it's possible. Like, what kind of actions could happen in an exploration scenario for D&D? So let's actually talk about types of actions that can happen while traveling or exploring. So let's add another section called types of actions. So let's say if we were to use a system like that, there would be foraging for food, foraging for medicine or magical herbs. What else would there be? Setting ambushes, being stealthy, foraging, ambushes, evading pursuit. Because chase scenarios would be great for the wilderness. Pursuing, tracking, right? So if there was a system whereby the party had to make the thing I like about the command point system is it creates an economy in the wilderness. Like if you have no economy, then, and you had a bunch of actions you could do, you could say, well, the person's guarding for all sorts, setting up ambushes from a great position in the wilderness. Another person is foraging for medical herbs. Another person is tracking someone else. There's some things that just don't go together. If you're evading pursuit, you're probably not going to be tracking somebody else. You're probably not going to be taking the time to look for herbs in the environment, or at least it would cost you something, right? If you're doing all of these things, it would you probably have to have something to balance, some choices to make, right? That's another thing you want to add. So, stakes are the you make choices to manage those, and how do you work through all of that? So let's see what we can get. Like evasive maneuvering, so that's escaping pursuit. Pursue a target, right? And to keep it together, that would be regroup, like a regroup action would be something we can do. I don't know what that would mean, but so I think regroup rest. So that might relate to something I'll talk about in a little bit called conditions, because it'd be interesting to have some group-based conditions that can happen, like being lost or disoriented or spent or shaken or exposed, and what those things might be. I have some thoughts already about what those might be below, but I don't have the thoughts on how you recover from them. So maybe regroup or rest would be a great way to use an action. What about getting familiar with terrain? Explore, just explore. Like that could go with some idea I have a little bit later here called terrain familiarity. I like the idea of how familiar you are with the terrain affecting things like how easy it is to navigate, or how easy you might be to ambush, or how easy it is to find something or get lost, or any of those things. There has to be some sort of home territory advantage, right? So maybe, explore would be an action you can take. Let's see, what else would be out there? What are the types of actions? I mean, camping, yeah. You want to secure camp, though. Maybe secure an area. Set up a defensive area, right? You don't have to be traveling. You just be in the wilderness. What else do we have here? I can crash systems. No, I don't want to do that. Defeat ECM, sensor goes. Well, stealth would probably be one of them. Do I have in there? Evading pursuit, setting an ambush, stealth. So maybe that's an action you can take. Boost engines would be going faster. Maybe that's an action, right? Speed through terrain, or rush through terrain. I'll call it something else later. Speed travel? I don't know. What else could we do? Emergency repairs, that's the recovery one I put up before. Fire all guns, yep, not really much of a target systems, no. Maybe observe is, though. Maybe observe is a way, like observe. Surveil. Information gathering. I'm probably not spelling that right. I'm sure I'm not spelling that right. Actually, surveil. Still not spelled right. There we go. Yeah, maybe that's something that can have some systems. If you have any ideas, by the way, throw them down in chat because I am spitballing here. Above and beyond would be like push through something, deal with a crisis, do your duty. That's a sort of that's how you generate command points in this system. Some people in these roles of engineer, gunner, bridge role, whatever, they can do their duty, which means they don't actually perform one of these actions. But if they just do that, so it's considered to be basically like a passive skill check, they generate a command point that can be used to fuel some of these other actions. So that's how the economy is run there. I'm not sure if I like that idea or not. It certainly could be good. But anyway, so that's the system there. So let's get to the next. Let's get to Adventures in Middle Earth and how that runs. So actually, let me roles while traveling. Create a section called roles while traveling. Exploring. Now, I'm probably going to end up using the roles from Adventures in Middle Earth, but let's go over them first. All right, so Adventures in Middle Earth, great system again. If you find something out there, there are 4 roles. A guide is in charge of all decisions concerning route, rest, supplies. They rely on wisdom and survival proficiency. Scouts, they're in charge of setting up camp, opening new trails. Scouts rely on stealth and investigation. Hunter, they're in charge of finding food while in the wilderness. Hunter rely on successes with survival check. And then lookout, in charge of keeping. Notice that scout and lookout are 2 different things. So that's basically a guard, right? In charge of keeping watch, lookouts rely on their abilities and perception. Now, the way that journeys are determined here are that players are assigned tasks and plan the route. So in other words, they get one of these roles. When they say task, that's what these roles are. Lore Master determines the peril rating of a journey. The guide makes an embarkation roll. In other words, the random encounter table is basically, and how well the journey goes is done by some sort of guide navigation skill check. Then the Lore Master either relays the results or additional hints. They determine the number of journey events. So there's all kinds of events that can happen. And they move on there. And then they arrive. And then there's this thing called, there's like a sanity-based skill in Adventure in Middle Earth called Shadow, I think it is, that is very Middle Earthy and doesn't really apply here. So I'm not sure we can do that essentially. But I like the idea of roles, like having people have roles in the system that have some outcome. So let's talk about what those would be. So there's the leader, right? And the leader would do things like plan the route, assign roles. I don't know what else they would do, but they would basically be responsible for or maybe it'd be the navigator. Leader/navigator. So they would affect random encounter likelihood by choosing a safe or unsafe route. They would, and it would be interesting to have some sort of time spent. Well, I can get to wilderness in a second, but I like this idea of terrain familiarity. Can you spend some time before the journey studying maps, talking to people about rumors of the trail ahead, things like that to get to some level of familiarity to know what it is, like going from unknown territory to at least unfamiliar or unfamiliar to familiar. Could be really interesting. It could be an interesting mechanic to set things up before a journey. So that's what I can think there. And then I can think the guide would avoid obstacles. They would find paths, keep from getting lost. What else would they do? Avoid encounters. Then there's the guard, which would counter ambush, watch for ambushes, watch and counter for ambushes. Avoid someone getting lost from the party. Party separation. What else would they do? Mitigate damage, right? Like falling logs or rocks. Mitigate environmental damage. What else do we have? We have, I don't know, like the logistics, the cook. They call them a hunter in the other thing, but that assumes you're hunting the whole time. You might be foraging, right? So call them the quartermaster. And they would do things like set up camp, safe and secure, rests. They would cook meals and maintain the health of the party. So I'll get to what that might mean in a second. So I'm just going to theorize through some of this. But what else might there be? Quartermaster might also... The guy is a team master the same as a quartermaster. So the difference, a teamster would be keeping pack animals, keeping them safe. Let's call that. So I'll just make it a separate position for now. Teamster. Pack animals, safe and guided, lost provisions. That might be quartermaster too, though, but access stored items in an emergency. So, all right, so that we're getting some flesh out what these roles might be. All right. So let's talk about in-game effects and what would actually happen. So I like a replacement equivalent of advantage. Like when you split a role between two players, right? That you can use either one player's skill check or another player's skill check. It's basically advantage. It's basically what you're doing. But you create an effect at the table where it feels like you're working together. You're not just telling a player to roll 2 dice. You're telling 2 players, each one of you roll, and you're either granted the worst outcome of either one or the best outcome of either one. In which case you're like, oh, we affect each other. It's this shared sense of shared shared burden or shared working together, I guess is what I'm looking for. I'm not sure what the leader navigator would do. So because I'd have to come up. I want what I want out of them is that would be keep parties from getting lost, right? Any save to get lost could use the navigator's role instead. Can use navigators role instead. So the guide, if there's the guide getting lost, they might do that. Leaders, they can roll a int, I don't know, history or something like that. An int check to avoid an encounter, a random encounter. That could be it. INT. Guide, avoid obstacles getting lost, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not sure all of these. Let's say guard. Let's look at guard first because I had that firmly in mind. Whenever like an ambush happens, you can use the guard's perception check as your to replace another player's role for surprise instead. So this basically gives everybody advantage on a check. So, but I mean, that can bleed over into guide too, right? So, but would it be perception for their perception check, or would it be something else? Probably perception, I guess. Yeah. Or investigation. Yeah, perception, we'll say. The guard, when ambushed, the guard rolled perception. And this can be used in place of any other player's roll when rolling perception for surprise. Roll for surprise. It's a basic outline now. I'm spitballing again. Guide would help avoid the ambush altogether. The guard would help not be surprised if the ambush were to happen, right? So a guide would get a save for an ambush. Rolls. Save against encountering an ambush in the first place. So they want them to ambush the ambush. So they want them to notice the ambush before you even get there. And I can tell you how that actually goes because I don't want to get into my military background, but yeah. So when you spend a lot of time in the field, if you're not moving very quickly, you can be on the watch. And there's a number of times where you're like, this place would make a really good place to get ambushed. So you call halt to the line, and maybe the leads go off, and they check out the sides of the road or the pathway. And if you're proceeding cautiously, there are actually a lot of ways to bust an ambush. It's still hard. It's still hard to do. But because a good ambush team will avoid like these obvious places for ambushes or fake an ambush and then send you back running, and they actually ambush where you might go, where you might hold up. Lots of different things that can happen there, locking fields of fire, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that's certainly a possibility. Quartermasters would do things like help with like recovery from exhaustion, with good meals. So there's like they get a roll if someone can't sleep because of like storms or not having a tent or something like that. Guides might be able to forage for herbs, medicine. I don't know. So yeah, that's what I think those rolls might be able to do. Events while traveling, things like that. Those are more, this is something you don't need a set of rules for. I think people are fixated on the wrong thing when it comes to events while traveling. And that's why wilderness encounters don't seem particularly fun, right? Because it's usually like, you fall off a cliff and you take a couple of dice of damage, you get stung by a bee, or a bear attacks, or you get ambushed, or there's a lot of combat, right? Some monster comes out of the wood and attacks you. Anyone who's spent any time in the wilderness, most of the time you're worried about turning your ankle or bees or ants or something like that. You're not really worried about bears or trolls or whatever. Although you're worried enough about bears, for the most part, your real problem are an injury, right? Like you just make a wrong step, land on the wrong thing, sit on the wrong insect or something like that, right? Or you cut yourself, get infected. Those are the kinds of things you're actually worried about in the wilderness. Especially if you're in a group, right? Animals do not want to mess with large groups. But anyway, so I think it's a missed opportunity in most D&D adventures that they begin combat basically just like on a road or, in a field, on just a square, 25 by 25 square, where just combatants just rush at each other, right? That there's not enough layering of potential effects of environment into these encounters. So what do I mean by that? Let's take an ambush. Being ambushed crossing a stream where there's a tedious log that you kind of have to balance to get across, where the ambushers wait until you're crossing this log where half the party's on one side of the stream, half the party's on the other. That's a great example. Bridges, likewise. Waiting until you're on a small, narrow path. Losing supplies, right? Waiting until there's a big, collapsed part of the road with a big puddle in it that you might have to not be able to get across easily. I mean, all those things are sort of things that I think we're missing opportunities when we create wilderness environments. Often it's because they happen out of the blue, right? We just have random encounter with a troll. So the troll runs out of the woods and starts attacking people. But if you make it that it's intertwined with the story of what do things do in that environment, or how does that environment affect people, I think, again, you don't need rules for this. You just need to exercise a little bit more imagination. So running across a troll might be that it's pulled down a moose and it's having a meal, and it's upset because now you've run across its meal and it just wants to finish its meal. Maybe you can find a way to get around it. Maybe you can find a way, maybe you can ambush it while it's eating. Maybe it gets angry and just charges at you in a fury because it's defending its kill. Those are things that you can, they give life to an adventure in an environment that don't require like a crazy amount of rules or setup. It's just taking a minute to think about how is the adventure designed, right? Let's say in your Arctic environment, and sort of a crevasse opens up and you fall into that, right? Or you fall off, part of a road collapses on a ridge, right? And you go tumbling down the ridge. You lose supplies, or you injured. You know, there's things that can happen where I said earlier, hit points don't matter, and that's true. This is where things like that people don't bother with, because there's not a lot in terms of effects to really affect what happens out on the road. So again, this is all theory crafting, and I don't have any rules here. This is the outline for the rules I would begin to make up. Hey, Fever Dream Studios, how you doing? It's great to have you here. Yeah, no problem at all. I don't have any prep to do this week, so I'm thinking through like what are the raw material of encounter design that I would use for the wilderness, like travel, things like that. I'm not going to recap everything, but that's where I'm at. So anyway, to this point of hit points during travel don't really matter, right? You can sleep for that night. And if you're traveling in the wilderness, usually there's no reason to not take a great restful night and recover all your hit points, right? There's very few things pushing you along that road. So losing even all of your hit points doesn't really matter. Instead, what if there were some sort of conditions on the road that, based on what you've encountered while you travel, based on how well the journey has gone, based on the hardships you've encountered, like by having events like managing a landslide, or there's a mudslide where you have to get the animals back up, or some of the animals got injured, or you're trying to keep from losing some of your supplies, or it ended up being because of the rains, the rivers are swollen, and you had a really hard time crossing a few rivers. There's a couple of things that can happen to players that might have some effect. So I was tossing these ideas for effects around. And I don't know, they're not hard and fast, but these are, again, group-based effect. The entire group, when they encounter a monster in the wilderness, or whether they get ambushed, or trying to find their way to a specific location, trying to recover their hit points, there's only a few knobs and levers you can turn in this. So I'm trying to list out what they might be. So let's say you had a condition like disoriented for the group, like they got lost. And I know I've lost as a separate thing, but they've just lost their bearing. They're maybe, not completely lost, but they're just disoriented in the wilderness. Something has happened. Maybe they have disadvantage on perception investigation, or investigation for discovering things, or surprise checks. Maybe that's a condition they can go on. Lost itself, like they're truly lost. They don't know where they are. Maybe they have disadvantage on survival checks, which is good because it's a check they need to get unlost, right? There's some recovery here. Let's say we were using the actions I talked about earlier, and they were taking this regroup / rest action, right? And it takes that, and it's a 4-hour action that takes them to try to get unlost, and in which case they roll survival again. But because it's a disadvantage, they might be lost for a while, right? Depending on how difficult it is. Let's say they're spent, right? I like this idea of, I love the idea of damage, right? Because damage, exhaustion, wear and tear from the road, those are things that travelers worry about, especially when they're on foot or horseback. As an aside, I should talk, by the way, there's a complete misconception about horse travel in D&D games. They act like horses are not cars, right? You're not passively sitting there. If you ride for 8 hours a day, you're going to be tired. Your legs are going to be absolutely exhausted. Your back is going to be sore. Or if you walk for 8 hours a day with supplies, especially, you're probably going to be tired, right? So exhaustion should probably play a higher role. But what does that mean, right? 6 levels of exhaustion. Once you get mechanics to start building up exhaustion, it can go downhill quickly, because if a couple of these things stack, now you've got 2 levels of exhaustion. You're just 4 levels away from death, right? Do you really want to take that step? I don't know what the answer to that is, but my thoughts are, in addition to levels of exhaustion, which I think people should probably look at, and maybe that's something that these roles can go. Like at the end of a journey, 8-hour journey, everybody takes a roll for exhaustion, but if the guide makes their survival check, let me put it there. Rolls for I have rolls, RLES. I don't know what I was thinking up here. Rolls for exhaustion. Let's say guide can replace a survival check for anyone's con check for exhaustion, for anyone's level of exhaustion. And what that might mean is you could call for everybody to make some sort of con check at the end, although I don't think that's a good idea. I'll tell you why in a second. Or you could just say the group either gets to the level of exhaustion or not, and it's the guide that determines. You do a group check, like half of the people succeed, the group doesn't get it. Or you let the guide roll, and it's basically advantage at that point. I think that's a pretty good mechanic, and I'll tell you why. Everybody in a journey group, everybody should get the condition, or nobody should get it. You shouldn't get like one set of people, like the hobbits in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, they might have had a harder time journeying, and they would be more tired and more vulnerable, but Boromir or their guides were running back and forth and doing a lot more work to keep that from happening. So they were expending their resources. So that's a shared outcome for everybody. And I think you should keep things shared when it comes to travel and exhaustion. So so some of the things you can do are like Lost. Like I said, Lost gives them disadvantage on survival checks. They're easy to ambush, maybe. Easy to ambush. Spent, maybe they lose. This is all theory crafting, by the way, so I'd love to hear your reactions to this. Let's say they're spent. They lose their con bonus to max hit points. Now, I don't have a recovery from that. Maybe they need to take a day to recover from that. But it would be, if hit point damage is not reasonable for travel, and I just said it's not, because you can just sleep and recover it. You want something that you have to recover from, or do something to recover, get a skill to recover from, do something, right? That not quite the same thing. So I don't want to overturn the healing mechanics in the game, but there is a concept of reducing max hit points. So what if we said that you lose your con bonus from your max hit points? That was just it. So that scales with your levels. That's kind of what I like about it. That's another thing that's difficult with travel, is that same thing with falling. Like you take a d6 for every 10 feet you fall. Really, really deadly, or really at least impactful for a first level character. For a 10th level character, not so much, right? Even actually falling 50 feet for a 10th level character. Falling 100 feet for a 10th level character. Not that big a deal. And that's because it's tied to their level. I'm not going to revisit the falling damage, because I really don't have an idea there. But I don't want to repeat that problem with travel, right? So you have a wilderness problem, and a branch falls on somebody. They take a d6 hit points. Maybe it's a problem at first level, but who cares as you get higher level? So instead, if you have something that scales, so there's 2 things that I can think of. One, you lose your con bonus to max hit points. Most people have con bonuses, because con is usually like the second or third priority for most characters, but not everybody. And it would only have to be for 0, right? Someone who lost their con bonus, if it was negative, they gained hit points. You don't want that. But lose positive con bonus from max hit points. That's interesting. It would layer on another mechanic where they have to keep track of what that means, what their max hit points are now. But until they recover, I don't know. Maybe it's a roll to recover every long rest. Maybe that could be supplemented by the quartermaster if you have a quartermaster check earlier, right? Offset by quartermaster. Then we have shaken. Maybe they've just been through like storms for days, and something has happened. So maybe their max hit points are halved. They can only recover their max hit points until something. I don't know. Again, that would be like quartermaster rest. Roll every recovery. Be harder, right? Long rest. Offset by staying in it in. So they really need something significant here, or significant roll by quartermaster. So those are all possible. Then there's things like exposed. Anyone has advantage on tracking or spotting the party. Like increase their chance of a random encounter. Big troll sees a party walking across and decides you're going to go get them a meal. Those are all conditions and situations. I'm sure there's more. If you have an idea for one, let me know. But those are great. Not great. I don't know if they're great. Those are what I can think of that could happen. Again, I'm just talking about the raw material, right? So what would happen here? I have two headings called crisis and events while traveling. I don't know what this would be other than you have some sort of event, like you have a sort of a land engagement. I think it's good to keep these out of specific descriptions. Like you don't need to describe the individual logs rolling down the hill, but let's say you have a landslide, tree collapse, wildfire, mishap crossing a river, something that can lead to the condition, right? And the crisis becomes someone's lost in the river or falls down a hill, and they go through some management strategy for that, or the animals get spooked and run, and they go through that, and that results, like success means they recover, move forward. Failure means they take on one of these conditions. They're lost, right, chasing the animals around, or they're exhausted crossing the river, right, because they've lost a couple people down the river, things like that. And I do want to get to a technique for managing that in your current game. So I don't like I said, I don't like individual risks. I like just say somebody fell in the river. You spent all day trying to get to them. Somebody maybe roll a couple of athletics checks to see if you recover them. One or two people can do it, and then so I figure out what the outcome is going to be, and then I work backwards and ask the players what they did. So I'll for a character, I'll roll randomly. Bilbo, what were you doing that made you fall into the river when you were crossing? And give it over to the player. Let them say, "Oh, I wasn't paying attention. I was fumbling with my supplies. I asked for something and I slipped off the log and I fell into a river." Something like that. And then I could say, and then you don't ask the players what they did. You ask them how they accomplished something. That's what I'm saying by work backwards. So I ask them, "How did you accomplish falling into the river?" and give it over to the player. Let them narrate. Then I turn to one of the characters. What did you do that saved that character from the river? And they can describe, I stripped off my clothing, dive into the river, or I got some branch out, or something else that happened. And you can even turn to another player and say, well, when they got into what trouble did they get into when they tried to do it, and how did you help them out of that? And then that player says, oh, well, this person was trying to fish him out with a branch, and they slipped and they almost went into the river, but I grabbed their hand and pulled them out. So you can create this chain of events that work backwards. That's a technique that's really on display in Blades in the Dark, which has been retroactively game mastering. But I found people enjoy that, actually. It gives them a second to step out of the roles, the rolling of dice, and into just how did I accomplish this? And maybe you do a few dice to determine what the outcomes were, to ask who at the table did what. But I think that there's some utility there. I haven't done that as much as I would like to do, but occasionally I do it. But yeah, so and let's talk about terrain familiarity. That's another concept. Again, we're talking about the raw material here, what I might use, and there's other things like terrain positioning, environmental effects we're not going to get to today. But I wanted to talk about. Thank you very much, Hufflepuff Duck, for the subscription. I see I'm back on the horse. Thank you for your subscription as well. I really appreciate that. The follow, I mean. So terrain familiarity, that's another raw material that I'd love to figure out some way to work in to make all of this work together, right? This idea, and Rangers, I'll blame Rangers for this because we offload all thinking about terrain into Rangers, and if you have a Ranger in the party, none of this becomes relevant. I don't like that idea. I'm really kind of bugs me. But I like the idea of terrain familiarity in the same way that game masters have attitudes for social interactions, right? It's not a social interaction, but it's sort of your familiarity with the terrain and with the terrain and what you can get out of that. Like if you have a social interaction, different NPCs will either help you or harm you or work with you or not work with you based on their attitude towards you. And I think in travel, it would be interesting to have a concept with how well you know the terrain lets you overcome things like navigate through it more easily, avoid getting lost or more likely to get lost, make you easier or less easy to get ambushed, make it easier or less easy for you to ambush somebody, make it easier or less easy for you to forage for food. All of these things, it would really be great to have that affected by how familiar you are with the terrain. And I wanted to come up with some certain set of levels. So in the DMG, when it comes to social interactions, again, there's a reason why tapping a similar rule, even if the core concept of the rule is different, if the mechanics are the same, it gives you something that would feel familiar to other players if you create a system for it. So in the social interaction rules, there are just 3. Where are they? Noticing other characters, tracking. There's 3 attitudes: friendly, indifferent, and hostile. So stick to something like that in these rules, right? There's a special one of home, which I'll get to in a second, but basically unknown territory, unfamiliar territory, or familiar territory. Knowing like what the ground you're on, what type of terrain is it? Do you know, are there rivers here? Do you know what kind of food and animals hang around? All of those things. Do you know pathways or not know pathways? All of those things should make it really, really, should put a party who knows these things at a better position than parties that don't. All right, that's what should happen. So without any research or work or anything like that, you'd start out with unknown. I just know I'm going south, right? And maybe you see there's a mountain in the distance, but you have no idea how tall it is, how steep it is, what kind of terrain is around it. That's unfamiliar. So what would that would be unknown, right? So unknown would be, you have disadvantage on any roll in the environment. Sorry, my cat's messing around with something over there. A roll related to the environment. And that might be stealth, searching for somebody, avoiding an ambush, avoiding a double, like it might be double random encounter chance. It might be, like a disadvantage setting up a camp to see if you can avoid exhaustion or it would just be all of these things, right? You can't form a secure camp. It's just, you're literally wandering in a random direction, hoping you run across something good. It's a difficult situation, right? Then there's unfamiliar. Unfamiliar would be something like, you've got woods out there, there's broken hills under them. You're vaguely aware, you're aware there might be on a map, there might be a path out there somewhere, a river. You're looking to head west until you intersect with a river that you know is there, but you don't quite know how far it is or what bend it'll be at, those kinds of things. These would make it, unfamiliar would be things like disadvantage on, navigation checks, maybe. I don't know. What's the difference? What's the scale? Like getting ambushed is probably the most impactful thing that can happen to a party. So you're not at disadvantage in unfamiliar territory. Disadvantage trying to set up an ambush. But not be ambushed, right? And then familiar, you're at disadvantage. That's, you've been over this territory before. You've taken some time to walk it. You've done all those kinds of things. It'd be advantage on being ambushed when ambushed for perception. Advantage on foraging. Advantage, let's say, advantage when advantage or have the random encounter. But how does that separate from home? Home territory, like people who live here. they should be able to do something truly magical, right? It's all the benefits of familiar, plus they can take a bonus action hide in the environment. They can what can they do? Like a bane? Could someone do a bane? They get some environmental action, I'll say. And I should come up with what those are later. Like there would be a great environmental action thing where I want environmental effects. They can impose, get some environmental effect. I want to go through the spells and the other effect. Things like mud. People can get stuck in mud. You can get people to run into bees' nests. You can get them run into thorns and vines. You can get them to, do all kinds of things that you really could do when you know your home territory. Fall into an abandoned mine shaft. All these things are sort of possible. That should be something that home territory folks get that other people don't. Yeah. Well, anyway, let me think about that a little bit. We're right at our hour. Anyway, this is just theory crafting today. I wanted to sort of have one stream where, because I've gotten enough of these questions about when I keep saying, I don't like that environmental rule. And I keep referring to I want Stars Without Numbers or Adventures of Middle-earth, what all that means. These are sort of the raw material of that. This is not intended there are no rules here. Someday if I ever really sat down and created a supplement, it would probably be something along these lines, right? It would probably be something that was intended to make the game a little bit more exciting on the exploration pillar. Mostly because I have so much experience in the wilderness with either military experience or some other things like that. Anyway, that's what I was thinking. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this stream. It was really theory crafting. I hope we got something out of it today that you can use in your game. If you have some advice, if you have some observation that you thought from this was useful, I hope you would go ahead and put it down in the comments on the tavern wall below. I hope you'll hit me up on Twitter, tag me if you repost this or anything like that. Again, this is a new channel, so please do all the social media things. Follow, like, subscribe, thumbs up. Tell your friends, whatever, post it on your social media. Please tag me if you do. That would be really great. I'm Optional Rule on Twitter, Optional Rule pretty much everywhere. I run a blog at optionalrule.com. We had no blog post this week, just Mother's Day coming up. I almost canceled the stream because of that. I have a lot of things going on, some family in town. But we'll be back to it next week as we are weekly. So I hope you'll join me in future streams. I stream every Saturday at noon Eastern time. So I'll be here next week talking about D&D stuff, things like that. I hope you got something out of it. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for the new follows. I really appreciate it. I'm back on the horse. Thank you. Good luck with that horse, whatever it is. We'll be back with game prep next week. So I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Remember, until next week, fun is not optional. Bye.